how would you apply now the lens after your book, what you've learned about American neighborhoods? What would you say to the so-called international policymakers that do development in the fragile states, or to those leaders in those countries? What are some, maybe those operational lessons that you mentioned that could apply there as well?
So, again, for me, the cross-cutting theme that is how I look at things, both in fragile states and in developed countries. And for me, I wouldn't call the United States a fragile state. I do think we have a fragile society in many ways, and for some of the reasons we've discussed today. But in both cases, I think we always need to go back to this point that the success of countries depends upon the nature of relationships. What that means depends upon the country. In some places, I'm working on Libya. The call I had right before we started this interview or this discussion, I'm on the call speaking about Libya. And so my international and domestic worlds, I guess, are merging to some extent in terms of how I go about my day. But later today, I'll speak about Ukraine with somebody, and so on and so forth. But I think it needs to be a much greater priority, this challenge of social cohesion, this challenge of building, I would say, not necessarily the state, but what we would call intermediate institutions. In the fragile state world, that means, most importantly, bridging institutions, mechanisms that bring people together across different ethnic, religious geographies, and develop close social ties, common identity, common purpose of helping the country advance. And the more that countries, and some smaller countries are easier to do this or find it easier to do this than larger countries. If you look at Africa, the countries that are working better now for the most part are smaller, not larger countries. The Sudans, the Nigerias, the Ethiopias, the DRC, they're struggling partly because they're having more problems building cohesion. The Senegal, the Ghanas, Botswana has always done very well because it's been cohesive from the beginning. Those places are, they have a stronger national identity. They have, partly because of their size, partly because of things involving their culture or their schools or they've had different ways that they have built cohesion. They have built relationships across groups, bridging ties. And that to me is hugely important. And I don't think it's a high priority either of leaders or of developmental or international organizations. And there's lots of practical steps you can do. A simple step is ensure the top universities are bringing together people from across the country, and that or a couple of top high schools, but universities might be easier in a large country, bring people from all parts of this country, the future leaders, and ensure they all study together and make sure that they create those bridging ties when they're young, and find ways to maintain those ties and ensure we're creating cohorts of leaders who think of national purpose, national identity, national goals. You have that in East Asia much more than you have it in Africa or the Middle East. And there's many reasons. The Middle East and Africa is post-colonial. East Asia, for the most part, their states are built on old, especially Northeast Asia, built on old civilizations. It's different, but to the extent that we can build unified, cohesive groups of leaders who run countries at different levels, a lot of problems will be easier to solve.